Buen día, muy buenos días, very good morning. First off, congratulations. It was impressive coming up, but it's even more impressive standing up here and seeing this full room, especially knowing that the first TBB happened here in Barcelona in very, very different conditions. And I think this is very symptomatic of what has happened. So congratulations to the guilty people, to the responsible people for this, but congratulations to the whole ecosystem. Indeed, as Director General of IDAE, the Spanish Energy Agency, part of the Spanish Ministry for the Ecological Transition, it's an honor to be here today. Our agency has been part of the energy transition in Spain for the last 40 years. It's our 40th anniversary this year, and is now a key part of the inflection point of the energy transition that we are seeing in Spain right now. So to prepare this opening, I wanted to focus on the big themes that, fortunately, my predecessors on the stage have already started talking about: economic growth, geopolitical resilience, and how that is built into the energy transition. And my idea is to try to put together some of the emerging thoughts, or putting together some of the existing thoughts around these concepts that we've been seeing. But unfortunately, to start talking about economic growth, to start talking about geopolitical resilience, we need to start talking about something entirely different. And it is the fact that we have a climate crisis that is still going on. Last year, carbon emissions kept going up, despite the fact that we have known about this officially, institutionally, at the very least since 1992. For millennials and other generations out there, 1992 is 32 years ago. It's not 10 years ago, as sometimes we might think. For 32 years, the international community has committed to changing the trend on this color chart, and we are still struggling to bend the curve. And it looks like, from worrying news only this week, that things might get even worse than we expected, because the natural carbon sinks of this planet seem to be slowing down. The natural absorption capacity of carbon sinks seems to be slowing. So there is a lot of work to do, but fortunately, we seem to have the right brains and the right minds at it at the same time. Fortunately as well, at least Europeans seem to be aware of the issue. Europeans seem to be concerned about the issue, at least according to the Eurobarometer. But not only that, but the energy crisis of the last few years has helped us join the dots, finally. Probably in this room we already knew about this, but finally European society understands that the energy transition is not just about the climate crisis, it's also about security of supply, and it's also about economic security. It's about reducing our vulnerability to somebody using what we import, what we really need, as a war weapon. And what's very interesting in a forum like this, I think, is that European society understands that we will need innovation, that a lot of the solutions to the climate crisis will come from innovation. So energy is as a tool for fighting the climate emergency. Should we focus on that? Should we focus on the geopolitical aspects? Should we focus on the growth or the industrial aspects? Do we even need to choose? As my predecessors, I think we don't have to choose. I think we are in front of an opportunity if we do things properly. It's a necessity/opportunity, depending on whether we move at the right pace, depending on whether we create the incentives at the right pace. Enrico Letta, the former Italian Prime Minister, as you know, he was tasked with writing a report on the European single market. One of the things he said recently, in fact, in Barcelona, is that the energy market, the energy single market in Europe, can actually be Europe's best asset to ensure its success in the European scale, at the international scale. So the energy transition being a tool for international success, economic success. So we can probably do this if we actually get the right tools in place. Unfortunately, a sustainable energy innovation ecosystem can probably do most of these again if we get things right. I was saying that the topics of geopolitics, economic growth, how that is tied in with the energy transition are very, very topical. We have been talking about them since COVID, since the war on Ukraine, since more recently, as Diego was saying, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has made it very clear in her political guidelines and her mission letters to the commissioners designate that competitiveness, industrial growth has to be part of the green agenda and vice versa. We cannot detach one from the other. And it's also very, very topical in the light of the Draghi report. If you haven't, I really, really recommend the read. I have heard and read lots of people having opinions on the report, and it doesn't look like all of them have read it, so I really do recommend it. It's surprisingly refreshing, coming from, a Eurocrat, if somebody wants to use that term. It's surprisingly direct, it's surprisingly clear, it's very, very refreshing, as I was saying. And one of the conclusions of Professor Draghi is that indeed, if we get it right, we can use the energy transition as a force for economic growth, as a force for geopolitical resilience. To start, though, something that is sometimes difficult to do in Europe, Elena was saying it, sometimes it's difficult to say, hey, we do things right in Europe. And it's very interesting, and this is a small side note, Europe does do a lot of things right. We are leaders in a lot of clean tech, we're leaders in rule of law, in life expectancy, low infant mortality, inequality. We're below other international superpowers in terms of inequality. We're leaders in sustainability and environmental standards, as we were saying. This, I think we should not lose track of this. I think this is something we have built. It's very difficult to maintain in very different contexts. It's something we should be proud of, and it's something that should guide what we want to do also from an economic perspective. And it's very, very interesting that Professor Draghi starts with this little reminder. Yes, we have lots of work to do. Yes, we need to improve the European economy, but let's not lose track of what our strengths currently are, lest we lose them in our efforts to do something different. But indeed, Europe is growing slower than other competitors. We're growing definitely slower than China. We're growing slower than the United States, which could be culturally, economically, a similar or competitive economy. And a lot of that difference in growth, Professor Draghi says, is down to productivity. It's down to the fact that a lot of our R&D investment, it's not very different in terms of, from a quantitative perspective, it's where we focus our innovation and our investment efforts. What Draghi identifies, what his report identifies, is that, and again, this is quite crude and it's quite explicit in the report, if you read between the lines adequately, it's what Draghi calls the middle technology trap. This sort of vicious circle where we are good at some things, Europe is historically good at some things, so we have the temptation of investing in those things that we are good at, so we are still world leaders in them. But that means that they are mature technologies. This means that, yes, we can get marginally better, we can maintain the competitive edge in some technologies, but that means that there is no potential for disruption. There's no potential to shatter the board and do something else and get the right rates of growth that we need. Things that have happened on the other side of the Atlantic. So we tend to stick to these middle technologies, which are very, very interesting, very, very good, but we are totally beaten by other technologies which come up at a much faster pace elsewhere. So it's good news for this ecosystem. I guess it's very good news for this context, because one of the very first conclusions of the Draghi report is that we need disruptive innovation. We need investment in R&D, we need investment in commercial deployment of disruptive innovation, and that is what European policymakers at the European level in the member states are being told right now. So the political conversation out there is quite favorable to the sort of conversations I hope we will be having this weekend. So first off, only for economic growth, disruption is useful in the European context. If we look at what else is slowing down economic growth, obviously, energy prices are key. It's a fact that industry everywhere needs energy. That is the laws of physics. It's very, very obvious as well, or very intuitive, but data matches it up. The more energy-intensive industries are, the more they suffered with the price hikes during the war on Ukraine. So the graph is a very direct correlation between energy intensity of industry and how industrial production reduced with the hikes in energy prices. That, again, as I was saying, is obvious. And again, because of physics, if energy prices are something we have to compete in, it doesn't make sense to compete in a field where we do not have the competitive advantage. We do not have the natural gas reserves that the United States does. So again, unless we invent some other teleporting technology, just by the virtue of having to pack it up into LNG and transport it across the Atlantic, or bring it from elsewhere, wherever we want to do, if we are going to base our industry on fossil fuels, which we do not have, we will not be able to have that competitive edge. No matter what market design, no matter what conditions, no matter what regulation, the raw material of the economy, which is energy, if we focus that on something that we do not have, we cannot be competitive. So therefore, it's good news, it's a good context to invest in disruptive technology, in things that make us less dependent from the outside. So obviously renewable energy to displace fossil fuels, obviously energy efficiency to reduce the energy intensity of each unit of GDP, of production, of well-being. But if we're talking about disruptive innovation, we should go a bit further. We should go to, and that is some part of the ecosystem is focusing on this, go beyond tech to decision-making. The low-hanging fruit of the energy transition, we've pretty much done that. The United Kingdom, the predecessor of the Industrial Revolution, which started because of coal, moving from man-powered and animal-powered to steam-powered thanks to coal, has shut down its last coal power plant. I think that is a key moment in the history of the energy transition. So the low-hanging fruit of replacing coal or replacing gas with renewable energy, that is happening. There's still work to do, but that is sort of happening. More and more of the weight of the remaining energy transition is going to be on the demand side. It's going to be industry, it's going to be business owners, it's going to be public administration and households making decisions differently about how they move, how they build, how they conduct their industrial processes. That requires regulation, but that requires a market. So many of the decisions are made if the right market conditions are there. We don't even need regulation if the right market conditions are there. A lot of innovation opportunity is there in the decision making and helping business owners or helping households make the decision to replace fossil fuels with renewables. Technological innovation can also reinforce that reduction of external dependence through reducing the material that depends on critical materials that we don't have, but also moving even beyond that, moving away from incremental increases and moving towards radical disruption. We have a huge challenge which has a huge cost, and we need to deal with it at a huge speed. And by this I mean trying to think outside the box, or even metaphorically throwing the box out of the window. So to put a very clear example, and I think as startup entrepreneurs, as investors, you're probably used to disruptive innovation in different contexts, but to give maybe a very intuitive example, we need more power grids. So we need to be able to integrate more renewable energy into the system, and we need to be able to extract more electricity out of the grid to electrify, for example, industrial processes. But that takes time, that takes material investment, it takes steel, it takes iron, it takes copper, it takes transformers, it takes permitting. You need to physically move these things, you need to put them in the ground or up on pylons. That takes physical time. That's the incremental thinking. What if I told you we could duplicate the power grid overnight, just like that, just by making the decision? Well, the utilization rate of the power grid is well below 50%. So theoretically, if we use our power grid in the same way as we already use our telecoms infrastructure, we can duplicate our power grid with pretty much zero investment comparatively, with pretty much zero time comparatively. We can do that, but that requires changing the mindset. It requires moving from how do I put an extra power line here to how do I think about the power system differently. So, and that requires innovation in the market, and that requires innovation in the public sector. Fortunately, innovation is happening. International Energy Agency, only 2 years apart in its technology energy perspectives, is showing how we are moving away from prototype and towards mature technologies very, very quickly, how we are reducing material needs, for example, through innovation, how we are making things better, less expensively, and more productively, and therefore helping that decision making. But how? How do we actually do all of this? How do we actually drive all of this change? There's another of the gems for me in the Draghi report is this quote, literally in the first page. And this is about the middle technology trap I was talking about at the start. The fact that this vicious circle where if we only invest in what we're already good at, then we'll only be good at that, marginally better. We won't be able to have the disruptive innovation that we need. So what I invite, or what I suggest, or what I propose, is that we scratch out 2 words here, and we basically turn this into a self-fulfilling, that's meant to be scratched out. So we turn this into a dynamism which is self-fulfilling. We have a dynamism which is self-fulfilling because we set goals that are ambitious, that are clear, as Elena was saying, that help us or focus our innovation efforts so we know what we are building towards from the public and the private sector. We therefore put our collective investment capacity towards that. We get real-world results, and from that we reassess and we adjust our expectations and our ambition. And chances are, and this is happening continuously, that by the end of the circle, we will actually be a lot better off than we initially anticipated, because a lot of the changes that are happening in the energy transition already are non-linear. The human mind, and we learned this over COVID, the human mind is not very good at understanding non-linearity. And as I was saying, a lot of the changes happening are very, very non-linear. Whether we're talking about deployment of technologies in the energy transition, whether we're talking about innovation in different technologies. So as I was saying, chances are, by the end of the circle, because we have believed those targets, because we have collectively made them real, because we have made this a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a way, we have actually ended up a lot better than we initially expected to do, and therefore we can increase that ambition. As an engineer, at the start of my career, I was very focused on the fundamentals. That's what you're taught at university, laws of physics, standards, safety regulations. What I've learned is the power of perception. We are a social animal. We work with perception, and that is increasingly extremely important when it comes to the real world. Very quick examples, for example. So if you look at the deployment of renewable energy in Spain in the first decade of the century, we had a reasonable, interesting deployment year on year. This is annual renewable energy additions year on year in Spain. The physical reality of Spain did not change between 2012 and 2013. The technology wasn't radically different. We suddenly didn't have a different wind or solar regime. There was a different perception, different regulation, indeed, and therefore different expectations in the market, and therefore different decision makings. And then again, in 2018, 2019, government change, new energy plan, no significant technological disruption between 2018 and 2019 in particular, yet things on the ground, the real physical world, changed because of perception, the real importance of perception. And then as we were building towards 2023, we looked that we might reach 50% renewable electricity in our mix, and then actually we shattered that result. And then, since then, Spain has been more than 50% renewable in its power mix, and we have, created jobs through this, or rather the sector has created jobs. We have continued to export technology. We have become very attractive in terms of investment in renewable energy, in clean tech, and in industry, which is looking for cheap, competitive energy prices. So targets, believable targets that we actually believe and we make real because we believe in them, are very, very important, despite my university engineer self thinking that what was important was the kilowatts and the torques. So, for example, the fact that we have been able to translate at the last COP international climate commitments into specific renewables and efficiency collective targets internationally, for example, is important. The fact that we have specific targets at the European level is important. This is a double-edged sword, as we saw in the Spanish case. Because if those targets are not credible, if we start to crack those targets because there is still risk, policymakers sometimes do this. They want to be business-friendly, so they say, hey, I know this is very ambitious, but okay, we might rethink this. You're trying to be business-friendly, you're actually shattering business cases. You're actually stopping investment because you're saying that the really ambitious target that you set might not be so real. So people thinking about investing in a startup, in a technology, putting money into innovation, putting money into commercialization, they're thinking, well, why should I invest in all of this if this is still up for conversation? So, and I think this is a lesson for the public sector, but I think it's a lesson also for the private sector in terms of that public conversation. I think there's a collective responsibility here of explaining, of making everyone understand how being ambitious, if you do things right, it's not necessarily anti-business. In fact, it's what business actually needs. It's certainty, it's predictability, in a reasonable, rational way, obviously. So that's the importance of ambition and predictability. We need innovation to happen in the tech, in the market level. We need innovation in regulation, obviously. Take this as an inside hack, if you want, as somebody who came from the private sector and has been working in the public administration in the last few years. Because we tend to fall in the temptation of thinking that things will sort of happen because it makes sense, and the European regulations and directives say it, so this will happen. Well, it won't necessarily happen on its own. Or, well, because my business model makes sense, there will be a neat little box in the regulation where my innovation will fit. But not necessarily, especially not if it's disruptive innovation. It's unlikely that policymakers will make your box for your particular innovation. And it's unlikely that the entirety of policy, whether it's energy policy or industrial policy, will be overhauled overnight, because governance is complex, powers are spread amongst different administrations. This is complex. So what I invite you to do, and again, take this as you will, is to stress test legislation, to figure out what exactly are the barriers. Don't expect the entirety of legislation to be sort of predefined for your particular innovation track, because that is not going to happen. Stress test it. Figure out where are the exact barriers. So this is the area, at least in our vision, at least in the Spanish case, of fine-tuning. We have the big targets, the big commitments, the big ambitions. It's about basically which article of which royal decree or which piece of legislation is stopping your particular bit of technology or your particular business case from making sense. That is the sort of thing that policymakers who are thinking about how can we make this work, that's what we actually need. We know where we want to go. We're very public about it. We're very clear about it. Our vision can be read anywhere. It's the fine-tuning. How do we actually do this? Because your competitors, the industries you are trying to disrupt, they're very aware that as private companies, they have a role to play in the public conversation. So innovators, investors, people in the ecosystem, my invitation is that you also take your seat at the conversation, at the table of the public conversation, that you help shape, that you help make the market, and not only expect it to be created for you. Again, this requires investment. It requires investment in the private sector, obviously. It requires public support, at least in some cases. It's good news. It's the right place and the right time, because governments, listed companies, and venture capital investors are increasing their investment in clean tech, in startups, in R&D. That is one of the biggest roles that we play as IDAE, as the Spanish Energy Agency, in the Spanish government. A lot of that, in our case, has been through the Spanish Recovery and Resilience Plan. We have supported over 3,000 energy transition projects throughout the country in more than 30 grant programs, mobilizing over 7 billion investment. And a lot of it has been in deployment of clean tech, but a lot of it has been in the development, the innovative part of the actual development of technology. So whether that is clean tech in electromobility, whether it's marine prototypes for marine technologies, whether that's new components for the renewable energy value chain, whether it's new business models, or renewable hydrogen value chain. So we have been supporting this through public funds and also through investment. We are a publicly owned company, so our only shareholder is the Spanish government, but we invest. We have been investing in the last 40 years. We have made available only this year 100 million euro to invest in startups, in scale-ups, in joint ventures with established companies, if that makes sense. We want to invest in innovative technologies because we understand there's also a role for the public sector to play in this. Finishing off with the last few messages, as I was saying, if we do all of this properly, we can actually probably end up a lot better than we started. And the example here is our National Energy and Climate Plan in Spain. We have recently submitted to the European Commission Spain's updated Energy and Climate Plan, where pretty much every single energy indicator has been updated, has been increased, and that has only been possible because of the progress made in these years. But what's interesting, and going back to the very starting point, this will mean bigger economic growth in Spain, thanks to this energy and climate plan in the decade, and bigger energy resilience because of 90 billion less imports in fossil fuels throughout the decade. So is there a trilemma? It's an opportunity or a necessity. It will only make sense if we actually make it happen. So congratulations for today. Let's make it happen. The public sector will be there. We need all of the innovation community there as well. Thank you very much.